Hello. My name is Kim Ades, and I am the president and founder of Frame of Mind Coaching. And you have just joined the Frame of Mind Coaching podcast, where we invite willing candidates to get coached live and in person right on the podcast. Today, my guest is Lara De Sousa, and we know her a little bit. We've been hanging out together over the past little while. She is actually a client of Frame of Mind Coaching, and she's just made a big transition, and she agreed to be on the show. So, Lara, welcome.
Thank you.
We're excited to have you here today.
Thanks. Me too.
So before we jump in, and I do want to jump into your challenge, I want you to share with everybody a little bit about you. And you know what? Why not? Tell us also a little bit about your coaching experience with Frame of Mind Coaching.
Yeah, so my name is Lara, and I work in the healthcare industry. I'm a vice president of patient care and operations in a home care organization in Ontario. I've been in healthcare for basically all of my career in various roles, from a frontline clinician all the way up to different senior roles, and so I love it. I'm passionate about care in the home, and so here I am. And in terms of my experience with Frame of Mind Coaching, it was an experience that I actually got in my from my last employer, and I always find that having an opportunity to really do some introspection, frankly, to show vulnerability with somebody that is there really to sort of support your learning and your growth as a professional, but frankly as a person, I think it's a gift. It's a gift to be able to have that kind of experience. So I'm certainly grateful for it.
Amazing. So what's going on for you right now? You recently switched roles.
Yes.
And I don't know when that exactly happened. Was that before, pre-COVID, or was that like in the middle of things? When did that happen?
Well, it was sort of, to be honest, last year in about December, my old boss had actually reached out to me with this new opportunity. And, I was quite excited about it because it was sort of a larger scope, even though I was, in a very similar role in my last organization. It's just broader in scope. And so, but timing wasn't quite right. And then, of course, in March, COVID hit. And, it was important to me. I felt really, I don't want to use the word obligated, but I felt committed to the previous organization, so that I wasn't just going to leave the organization, the team, in a lurch in the middle of this pandemic that frankly nobody knew what to do with. And so it was important for me to extend as much as I could, so that I felt like I left the organization in good stead, but could start this new one in a timing that was, I felt, reasonable. So I ended up starting in June. So at the beginning of June, yeah.
So it's been a few months. How's
Yes.
it going?
It's going really well. It's going really well, I think, for the most part. I mean, it's always tough. I forget how challenging it can be to start a new role. Like, there's a lot of learning, and you go from feeling fairly confident in your shoes around, I wouldn't say being the expert, but somebody who's a bit of a go-to and, able to sort of make decisions reasonably quickly and with confidence. And then you're right back to square one, right? So I forget that, it's a humbling experience, and it's taxing, right? It's tiring. So anyway, but here I am. Yeah.
So what's the tiring part mostly? Is it the amount of new learning you have to do? Or is it the fact that, like, you're in a way, because your role, it's not that it's changed, but because you're in a new role, the old boots you were walking in are no longer appropriate. So now you're in these new shoes and you're like, they're not as cozy and as comfortable. I kind of have to wear them in a little.
Yeah, I think it's probably a combination of both, right? I mean, clearly, and even though the business is similar, so it's not like, absolutely every concept or every, idea is sort of new and like, what are they talking about, right? So it's not that, but the reality is it is a new organization. It's a bigger organization, which usually leads to a different level of complexity. It's broader in scope. So the previous one was very local, whereas this one is provincial in nature. It's a different culture, right? And boy, did I ever learn that from the last place that I was at, that I really needed to pay attention to what I was walking into, and really take a lens of curiosity versus, well, I'm just going to kind of fit in, and I'll just figure it out, right? And so that takes time, and in some ways more effort for someone like me to just sit back and observe and be curious versus getting right in there, right? So yeah, that's the piece, I think.
Okay, so what is your current greatest challenge?
um I think for me, it's I'm coming into a new organization where, I mean, obviously COVID is still front and center of mind for everyone, and we're now on the cusp of potentially the second wave. So certainly, in preparation for that. And so what I have always found really important to me is, taking the time to build relationship. I would say I'm somebody who is relationship focused. That helps me to understand not only the business, but who people are and what's important to them. And so, coming into an organization where, frankly, everything is now virtual, or just about everything is virtual, and so how do you make those connections in a much bigger space? Via virtual platforms that probably don't feel a little bit less personal to me, right? And so I think it's that.
So let me ask you a question. Okay, I'm going to ask you a little bit of a backward question. What
Sure.
do you think are the rules of virtual connectivity? Like, what are the rules we have learned to play by in COVID, in the COVID-esque era, right? Like,
Yeah.
what are the rules that we have kind of fallen into with virtual meetings, conversations, connectivity? What do you think they are?
Hmm. That's a good question. Um, I think it depends. I guess part of it's some ways reflective of the culture too. So, and I'll give you a very tactical example, right? So, depending on if I'm taking a call with a certain organization, I know that the expectation is turn on your camera, right? Turn on your camera because there is something about being sort of visibly present that is sort of the cultural expectation of that organization. And so that in some ways is your signal that I'm engaged, I'm paying attention, I'm
Yeah.
present, right? Versus other places where it's totally okay. You turn off your camera and you have the conversations, and you're presuming that, of course, So I know it's a very sort of concrete example, but I think part of it depends on the organization and what's sort of acceptable or deemed as the rule of engagement
Right.
through virtual care.
But there's also structural rules, like you need to make appointments, and
Yeah.
every conversation lasts a period of time. Like, it
Yes.
doesn't just end when it ends. It kind of, like,
Yep.
if it's in your calendar for a half an hour, it usually lasts a half an hour.
Yeah.
Right? It's like a weird thing. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
Even if all you need to do is talk for 10 minutes, it tends to last the whole entire
Yes.
time, and on
Yes.
and on and on, right? So there are these, like, unspoken rules about connecting. And it sounds like your challenge is, how do I do a better job of connecting? Am I right about that? Is that
I think
really the
so.
challenge?
I think so. Right. And, I think for me, it's, being part of the corporate structure can feel disconnected from the work. maybe that's not the right word, but from the reality of the business, right? Closer to the front line. And that has always been really, really important for me to be able to keep a foot in that. And so, so it is about connecting with people so that when they see my name via an email or the next virtual meeting, it's just not, well, she's over here somewhere, right? She's really part corporate. She really doesn't sort of understand, or worse, doesn't care about what really is the reality of working in this organization.
Right. So and as you're making your efforts right now to connect, like, how's it going? Is it difficult? Is it, do you feel like people get where you're coming from? Do they think you do care? Is that coming across, or not at all?
I'd like to think that they are. I mean, I've had a couple of comments with some folks. These are some of our frontline managers, because I mean, of course, I'm connecting with my direct team, right? So the directors that report directly to me have regular conversations, right? And so I'd like to think that they feel like I'm accessible. We're having regular discussions, both individually and as a collective group. I think for me, it's going past that level. And so when I started, meeting up with some of our line managers or frontline managers, I did get a couple of times, oh, nobody's ever reached out to us like this before, right? Like, this is new. This is, to be able to have a conversation. And so that was positive. I think for me, what I need to sort of figure out, how that it doesn't become, well, that was a nice gesture, right? That was a nice little token gesture because, I'm starting
New.
the role, right? Versus this is actually important to me, right? To stay
Okay.
connected with people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what comes up for me is a couple of things.
Okay.
And I'm a big fan of, like, trying to figure out what are the rules and then breaking them. Right. And I think
Yay!
you're a little like me.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So that's why I ask, what are the rules?
Okay.
And then what can we do that's wildly different from the rules? So right now already you've broken the rule. The rule originally was, our VP doesn't talk to us. And you're like, well, I'm going to break that rule. I'm going to talk to you. And right now that conversation is still, and I'm guessing here, I may be completely wrong. It's still in the context of business. It's formal. It's a professional conversation.
Right.
And so the rule is, I talk to you professionally. That's the rule. What would it look like if you broke that rule? Because in order for them to truly, know and be sure that you care, they also have to get to know who you are.
Right.
Right. So what does that look like if they actually got access to you on a much more personal, deep level? What would it be like to break the rules? Does it mean that, and again, I'm making things up, I'm completely throwing out wild ideas. Does it mean you send a video message weekly saying, hey, I'm thinking about you. Guess what I did this weekend? I don't know. I got ready for Thanksgiving, whatever. I don't know. I'm making things up. Or I went to No Frills and picked up 6 turkeys, or whatever it is, right? Like, so that you're sharing a part of you. That's a little bit outside of the norm. But for you, and it could be, you have coffee chats with groups of people on a regular basis. It could be like that coffee chat starts off with, we're not going to jump into business. I want to start off with a whole different line of questioning. What are you grateful for today? Everybody go around the room. Or it could be, I want to ask you one very important question. When you woke up in the morning today, what was the first thing you thought of? Whatever, you're making things up.
Right.
But the point is that you're starting it differently. You're breaking the rules. You're not going down the traditional path of meetings. Like, already you're having meetings, that's breaking the rules, but you also want to have them in an untraditional way.
Yeah.
Right? Because you want to bring your personality to the table. So one of the things that you said when we started talking is, like, I came into a culture, right? I came into this pre-existing culture. But here's the magical part about being a VP. You get to influence the culture and you get to set the tone. And you get to set the tone by what you bring to the table and how you have conversation. So you're in a unique position, in my opinion. You're still early on in the game where you can go back and say, okay, so what's the vibe I want to create in these meetings? What's the experience I want people to walk away with? I don't want it just to be perhaps straight up business. I want it to be warmer. I want it to be a little more personal. So, and not that it has to be 100% personal,
Of course, of
about
course.
baking pies, but it's how do I inject a little bit of that on a regular basis? How do I bring, a little bit of optimism, cheer, joy, positivity to people's lives? And it comes from me. It comes from who I am, meaning you, right? So for you, in your particular case, like you're coming from a set of experiences, but I want you to think about what's the culture I want to create and how do I create that? What part of me can I bring to the equation that they've never seen or heard of before? That's outside of the rules.
I'm just making notes.
Yes. So, and I want you to think in terms of one more thing.
Okay.
I was married, got divorced, got remarried. And when I got remarried, I married a man who had 3 kids. So I had 2 kids, he had 3 kids. And now we're putting this family together.
Right.
And, it's a new culture, right? So they weren't used to me. I wasn't used to them initially in the early days. But what did we do? We created a new culture together. So, first of all, we eat dinner every single night together. That's the new rule. What are the new rules? But also, and I want to throw this in your thought bank, is what traditions can you create that are regular traditions that they look forward to when the time is right?
Okay.
Now, every family has, let's call it a Christmas tradition. Well, you can create traditions for your organization, right? So in my family, for example, we have Family Day. It doesn't have to be exactly on the right date, but Family Day is a big celebration in my house. And everybody comes from far and wide, my kids, the 5 of them, to make sure that they're here for Family Day. Nobody ever misses Family Day because it's tradition that they eagerly look forward to. And if they have boyfriends and girlfriends or whatever, they're like, we need to tell you about Family Day. It's a thing here. And to be invited to Family Day, oh, what an honor. And so you can create those things. And that's the way you build relationship.
Okay.
How
That's really helpful.
How does that
No, that feels, there's just some really good ideas there, and it feels authentic, which is important to me. It needs to feel like it's not some contrived exercise that is frankly bullshit. It just need to feel authentic to me, right? So
yes.
yeah, so I think I need to find that.
And it could be like, bring your recipes and let's exchange.
Right.
We can't have like in-person potluck, but we can have virtual potluck.
Right.
Or, whatever. You can create things. You're creative. But think about like, what does home feel like to me? Because I want to create perhaps a homey environment. You can decide what it is. You can decide if that's it. But you have the power in your role to set the stage and make and create a tone moving forward.
Okay. It's funny. I just in my last job, one of my peers or colleagues she had just come from a conference, the IHI conference around, and it lots of focus around the notion around joy in work, right? And she came back with all of these ideas, and she sat down with me and sort of went through them, and one of them was around how do you set time that again feels genuine and authentic with your staff, that have nothing to do with, let me tell you about the agenda, right? Or right? And so hence the concept of espresso with Lara came up, because I love espresso. It was in my it was in my office, and it really became every Tuesday afternoon an opportunity where people could, they didn't need to make an appointment, they just needed to come in and hopefully enjoy a coffee with me. I drank a lot of espresso at the time, and it was really to try to get to know them a little bit more, and hopefully really people to get to know me a little bit more and ask whatever question, obviously within limits, that they wanted to know, right? And so, I learned so much. And my biggest regret, honestly, was that I hadn't done it sooner. That, and I think that's what you're sort of suggesting is, what is that tradition? What is the tone that you want to create in this new environment? Understanding that there may be some different kind of obstacles, right? It's not just one site. It was easier to do it there, but it doesn't. I mean, for goodness sake, we have all kinds of different options virtually that I could play with. So
right. And you get to be as creative as you possibly can
yeah.
right now. And that's really, what's called for in this day and age, just to really stretch your creativity and, to me, really try actually to identify those rules and say, what would it look like if I broke them all? Right.
Okay.
And,
okay.
and for you, that's a bit of a challenge. It's a bit of a fun game.
Yeah.
And I think it will surface some really, really interesting ideas.
Okay.
Yeah. Lara, right? Not Lara.
Yes.
Lara.
Yes.
Thank you for being on the podcast with us today. Thank you for sharing your challenge. I don't think it's unique. I think a lot of people are in the same boat where they're like, how do I really connect? What can I do that's different, new, and meaningful? So thank you for sharing that with us. And for those of you who are listening to the podcast and have a challenge that you want to share on the podcast, please reach out to me. I'd love for you to be a guest. My email address is kim@frameofmindcoaching.com. And for those of you who have a challenge and you're not prepared to share it on the podcast, please reach out to me anyways. My email address is kim@frameofmindcoaching.com. Lara, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. And thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome. My pleasure.